Meanwhile, the mother decided to try and put the basket of flowers back together, carelessly inserting the stems into the ground. Riella, horrified by such rough treatment, stood up from the bench and approached the woman, offering her help with the flowers. The mother eyed Riella suspiciously, not recognizing her, and the lady realized she hadn't introduced herself yet. Quickly, Riella explained that she owned a flower shop and had the skills to help. Hearing this, the woman hesitated, then agreed to let Riella restore the flowers, expressing her gratitude. Riella squatted down and carefully examined the flowers, figuring out how best to restore them. The woman, uncertain of the process, asked if it was too difficult. Riella reassured her that all she needed was good scissors, and soon after, she began creating a beautiful bouquet. The woman, relieved that the flowers would be fine, returned to her shop and soon brought even more beautiful flowers for Riella to use in the bouquet. Riella felt fortunate that her past experience with damaged flowers allowed her to help, but even she found it slightly difficult to combine the colors of the plants. The little girl, who had accidentally destroyed the original bouquet, asked if the flowers could be revived, to which Riella promised to make them even more beautiful, but only if the girl promised not to touch them again. Daisy agreed, and just then Nia returned, having safely carried the shopping to the carriage. She was surprised to see Riella helping with the flowers, but the lady calmly explained that she just wanted to help people, even though they had come to the city to relax. Seeing Riella happily creating bouquets for strangers, Nia decided not to interrupt. A few hours later, the sun began to set, painting the streets in orange tones. The important guest Daisy's mother had been expecting arrived. The elderly man immediately noticed the bouquet on the street and admired the composition of colors, impressed by the skill behind it. Daisy ran up to him with joyful screams, as they had not seen each other for some time. The grandfather, delighted to see his granddaughter, took her in his arms and asked how she was doing. Daisy pointed at the bouquets and explained that the kind girl had made them. The old man, curious about the person behind the beautiful flowers, asked Daisy's mother for more details. The woman explained that while they didn't know the girl's name, she had mentioned owning a flower shop. The old man, impressed by the bouquets, decided to buy them all, asking Daisy's mother to wrap them for him. That evening, Riella sat on her bed, feeling both tired and happy. Nia praised her for doing a good job and walking a lot, though she was a bit concerned about the amount of clothes Riella had bought. The assistant was eager to dress Riella up, but the lady was too tired to argue and simply wanted to sleep. Once Nia left, Riella was left alone with her thoughts, many of which were focused on the soon-to-be-opened room of stones. She felt tense, wondering whether she should tell Han about the flower with another bud. She hesitated, unsure if he would care, but then remembered that Han had given her the flower, so perhaps he should know about it. However, she decided to wait and not share this information just yet. A couple of days later, Luciane arrived for an honorary visit with the Stonemancers from the Round Table. Riella, already aware of their arrival, prepared herself and the mansion for the meeting. She greeted them with dignity, though she felt nervous and confused. Lucien, confident in his position, and the Stonemancers began discussing their plans, and in a moment of conversation, Riella admitted that she had been worrying about the opening of the room, and what might happen when Camilla opened the door. Curious, Riella asked one of the Stonemancers how they planned to open the room and stabilize the stones. Lucien, eager to explain, shared that the fury of the wind from the last opening would awaken immediately upon opening the first door. However, with the power of the holding stone, they planned to prevent the wind from causing any destruction. Lucien mentioned that more than 20 stones would be needed for this, which shocked Riella. He clarified that only he, Riella and Han would enter the room, with others standing by as a safety net. He explained that fewer people in the room would reduce the risk of danger, especially since the infinity spanel could expand the room into an entire street if it wasn't controlled. Riella began to understand that Han would be doing most of the work inside the room. Even though he was the strongest stonemancer, she was still worried about his ability to control the stones alone. Lucien mentioned that he had tried to reason with Han, but it was pointless. At that moment, the servants announced Han's arrival, so Riella and Lucien paused their conversation. When Han entered, Riella greeted him sweetly, but, to her surprise, he walked past her without saying a word. He addressed the servants as if Riella wasn't even there, leaving her in shock and confusion. She couldn't understand his behavior, especially since it seemed as though he was avoiding her. Han, however, was conflicted. Despite his business and preparations, his thoughts were consumed with Riella, and he feared his growing feelings for her. That night, Han struggled to understand his emotions, especially when he imagined Riella leading their child by the hand, a thought that left him blushing. The next day, Han arrived at the Countess's mansion, cold and distant. Riella tried to catch his gaze, but he turned away each time. As they got closer, he managed to escape further questions by focusing on the opening of the stone room. Riella felt uncomfortable, as it seemed that as soon as they got closer, they both pulled away. Lucien, however, stayed close to Riella, explaining everything to her and showing her the crystals. When Han finally announced that the assault on the Duchess's stone room was beginning, everyone gathered in front of the doors. As the doors opened, a strong gust of wind rushed out, and Riella clung to Nia. The assistant quickly instructed Lucien to stabilize the wind, and within moments the wind weakened, allowing them to stand calmly. Riella, relieved and surprised by how the wind was controlled, realized that nothing scared her anymore. Meanwhile, Han managed to completely deal with the raging stone, allowing the originally chosen four to enter the room. The lady was immediately curious about how the Archduke had managed to make the stone let them in. Han explained that it was not his merit. It seemed as though the room had simply decided to allow Riella in on its own, as the doors were no longer locked. Before entering, Han gave instructions to the stonemancers. Only after that did the others turn toward the newly opened entrance. Riella, Lucien, Han and Nia entered the first room. It was small but contained valuable items and stones. They began examining everything, but most of their attention was drawn to the magical books. Riella looked around in awe, as she was unfamiliar with the stones and was seeing such a room for the first time. Unexpectedly, Lucien pointed out that the structure of the room had changed slightly, which surprised Riella. Indeed. Although they had entered through the door behind them, there was now a passage leading to another part of the room instead of an exit. While Riella marveled at the room, this change struck her as well, since she was now the owner of the room. Han asked her for permission to open the box containing stones, and the girl, bewildered, allowed everyone to examine whatever they wanted, as she didn't mind at all. However, the idea of being an eyes was starting to feel strange to Riella. As she casually walked past the items, her attention fell on a stone placed on a pedestal which was firmly fixed in place. Completely unaware of its significance, Riella read the name aloud, Splitting Agate. Hearing this, Lucien and Han immediately turned around in fear, not expecting such a stone to be in the first room. Riella, not knowing its importance, asked what made it so famous. The representative of the Round Table began explaining the stone's historical background, mentioning the Fell Gorge, which had been created by this very stone. Riella was alarmed by the power of the crystal, realizing that in the wrong hands it could become a dangerous weapon. Lucien added that the danger posed by this stone was comparable to the Heliodor crystal. At the mention of the latter, Nia shuddered, but only the Archduke noticed this, though he said nothing. Han commented that this stone might be a replica, and Riella immediately asked what a replica meant. They explained that it was a weaker copy of the original stone. After processing the information, Riella looked at the splitting agate and suddenly asked if it could be taken out. Han was bewildered by the request, but Riella explained that she just wanted to examine such an amazing stone and would return it afterward. With a sigh, the Archduke gave permission to examine the crystal, but first he decided to ensure it was safe. Lucien and Han carefully examined the agate and found no signs of danger since the stone was dormant. Satisfied, Han handed the crystal to Riella and she began to inspect it with great interest. Suddenly, while feeling the fabric holding the stone, Riella felt something paper-like inside. She pulled out an envelope. Her assistant immediately recognized the handwriting on the envelope. It was from Duchess Hoson, though Riella had no knowledge of it. Before Riella could open the envelope, Nia snatched it from her hands, checking for any danger but finding nothing. Inside, there was no personal message, just a description of the agate crystal, which the Duchess had compiled herself. As Nia read, Han suddenly sensed one of the stones in the room, which had not yet been pacified, beginning to stir. The Archduke quickly pushed Lucien toward Riella and Nia to protect them, while he decided to deal with the awakened obsidian. The girl, unprepared for the sudden darkness, almost didn't hear Lucien's instructions. He extended his hand to Riella and asked her to hold on tightly so they could make their way to the exit together. Nia walked on Riella's left, and Lucien guided her from the right, almost holding her arm as they took the necessary steps. The lady counted each step with trepidation, afraid of making a mistake. Lucien told her to extend her hand forward, and she quickly felt for the door. Lucien signaled to Han that they had arrived safely and were not in any immediate danger, so he could proceed. The Archduke explained that the door wouldn't open yet, so they had to wait. Lucien reported that he had activated the stone, and Han confirmed that he had completed his task. Riella was surprised that the Archduke was left alone, but Lucien explained that otherwise they would only interfere with him. However, before Lucien could take Riella out, she suddenly broke away from him and found herself lost in the darkness. Alone, she couldn't see anything. The distorted sounds seemed to come from every direction, making it difficult to orient herself. Overcome with fear and loneliness, Riella sank to her knees and struggled to breathe. But soon she realized this wouldn't help and pushed herself up to stand, moving forward cautiously. She soon found something warm and soft and clung to it, only to realize it was Han. He warned her not to knead his thigh without permission, as it was his leg she had grabbed. Riella blushed terribly and pulled her hands away, but Han caught her wrist, preventing her from getting lost again. Deeply embarrassed, Riella tried to apologize, but the Archduke, not dwelling on the moment, sternly asked her to be patient. He reassured her that soon Nia and Lucien would come to her aid. Han retrieved a related spinel, hoping it would work despite its low activation probability. Determined, he used all his inner strength to activate it. The crystal came to life, though it was clear from Han's labored breathing that it wasn't easy for him. Riella watched, holding her breath, as he gathered his strength into a fist and forced the stone to activate, hoping it would assist her. Feeling that he was succeeding, Han asked Riella to prepare herself for the magic of the stone. Though she had no magical powers, Riella could sense something happening. Moments later she felt dizzy, and suddenly she found herself near Lucien, who immediately took her hand to guide her, ensuring she wouldn't get lost again. Han, who had landed nearby, scolded Lucien for losing track of Riella in the darkness, but Lucien justified himself by saying his priority was ensuring no one was harmed. Confused by the conversation, Riella asked what was happening, and Nia explained that the spinel had expanded the space, which is why Riella had gotten lost. Han's sister stone had been narrowing the space. The problem was the potential conflict between the stones due to the rapid changes in the environment. Lucien added that due to the absolute darkness, it was difficult to navigate, but the stones would give them a sense of direction. Riella quickly realized that, since they couldn't see, they would need to rely on sound. She could distinguish the sound of Han's footsteps retreating, which concerned her, as she felt they should stick together. Before she could catch up to Han, a blinding flash of light filled the room. When Riella opened her eyes, she realized the room had returned to normal, but its shape was distorted, likely due to the spatial spinel's effects. Far ahead, Han was battling a powerful stone, seemingly struggling to control it. Riella doubted whether they should intervene, as it was obvious he was having a difficult time. However, Lucien objected, explaining that his task was to protect Riella and that he could not afford to be distracted. As Riella was about to ask what Lucien meant, he shielded her from a powerful explosion with a wave of his hand, confirming that his role was to protect her and prevent the stone's powers from conflicting. Nia added that Han had entrusted their protection to them because of their respective abilities, though Lucien was already quite fatigued from the battle. After assessing the situation, Nia said they needed to find the spinel as soon as possible. Riella asked why, and Nia explained that the stone was unpredictable. While the power of other stones could be somewhat anticipated, the spinel was entirely different. It could activate unexpectedly, and if it did, Han would be thrown far away. Lucien recalled that Han had once stopped Riella from such an event, meaning that another battle could take weeks or months to resolve. Meanwhile, the Archduke managed to defeat several of the powerful stones in the room and stood contentedly before them, ensuring that he had dealt with these crystals. As he prepared for the next attack, he noticed that Spinel had already begun to tear apart the fabric of space visible in the sky. His main concern was that the others would gather near the door, when suddenly he saw a silhouette ahead. Barely catching her breath, Riella was running toward him with all her might, unaware that Spinel was already in action. The Archduke was surprised by her sudden appearance, not expecting to see her nearby. She had inadvertently entered a very dangerous situation, as Spinel was distorting the space between them. Confused as to why Riella wasn't with the others, since they were supposed to protect her, Han quickly refocused on the task at hand. There was no time to question the girl's actions. He had to activate the Sister Stone immediately. Fortunately, when he struck the ground, he was able to halt the distortion of space temporarily. This small but important effect brought Han some relief as he quickly ran toward Riella. The impact of the stone created a small hill, behind which the lady, having lost her balance, stumbled. Without hesitation, Han scooped her into his arms to prevent the stone from pulling her away. As he scolded her for wandering off, Riella, surprised, found herself too embarrassed to hear what he was saying. However, she quickly regained her composure and began to argue back, chastising the Archduke for taking too much on himself. In response, Han set her down and explained that, as a stonemancer, he had made plans to ensure their return. Plans that only he could handle. He warned her that their journey back could take months, but Riella wasn't pleased with that idea. She insisted that Madame Meldo would prepare a new dessert for dinner today, so they needed to return that evening. This demand left Han bewildered, and before he could fully process her request, Riella reached into her bag and pulled out something. She carefully checked its contents, revealing the petals of shining flowers, which had fallen off on their own. Han coldly questioned what would happen if someone saw the petals, as they were not meant to be shown to anyone. The lady assured him that she only intended to share the petals with him and Nia, not with anyone else. Sighing, Han decided to address this matter later, and, together, they began to leave the room. As they exited, Han instructed Riella to hold onto a piece of his clothing and not let go while he activated the crystal. The lady obediently grabbed the fabric, and Han focused all his energy on the stones. He reminded himself that they had only 3 attempts to escape, and he needed to clear his mind of distractions. After a few moments of intense concentration, Han tried to activate the stone, but he failed. Determined not to give up, he tried again. And this time, Riella, watching his struggle, realized how hard he was working. Though she shouldn't have intervened, Riella called out to Han, asking him to turn around because she wanted to support him. When he did, she reminded him that he could do anything and that they would enjoy sweets together later. This simple encouragement made Han smile, giving him the strength to try again, now more certain that he couldn't fail. This time he gathered all his power, and with a prayer for success, the spell worked. Later, the servants and stonemancers began sorting through the contents of the first room, which was filled with numerous items. As the hours passed, Riella began to feel dizzy from the abundance of work, but there was still much to check. Lucien approached her and suggested she take a break from organizing the inventory and visit the image crystal in the next room. Grateful for the suggestion, Riella agreed and set aside the documents. She headed to the room where Nia was working with the crystal. However, upon opening the door, Riella was shocked by what she saw. A terrifying image of a dragon burning everything in its path filled the room. Nia explained that she had set aside the images of Camilla's mother to focus on the battle itself. The sight left Riella trembling, but she thanked Nia for showing her. She noticed that, for the first time, Nia was struggling to speak, a sentiment that made Riella feel the weight of the situation. As the hours passed, Riella remembered that she urgently needed to prepare for the upcoming flower festival. She carefully arranged the flowers, letting her imagination run wild with the compositions. Her mind also lingered on the thorough planning required for her works, which was taking more time than expected. While she worked, Lucien stopped by to admire the aroma of the flowers. He informed her that he had completed all the documentation she requested, which surprised her. Lucien explained that although it had required some effort, it wasn't too difficult, and he was grateful to her for allowing the round table to use the stones. The conversation shifted when Riella realized she was receiving numerous letters asking her to lend out stones, much like the Duchess had done. Feeling the need to restore balance, Riella decided to charge a rental fee for the jewelry before distributing it to those in need. While enjoying tea with Lucien, Riella noticed that Han had not been around for some time. She confirmed Lucien's suspicion that the Archduke was busy trying to open the second door in the room. Riella was astonished by the sheer size of the door blocking their way, and Han, after failing to open it with physical force, began to devise a new plan. Day after day, the Archduke experimented with various combinations of stones in an attempt to open the door. That's why the girl explained that he had been stuck there, working tirelessly, and she occasionally visited him. Hearing this, Lucien thought deeply but said nothing, deciding to give Han the space to work on his own. Changing the topic, he asked if Riella had decided on the composition for the flower arrangements. She replied that she hadn't yet, explaining that she experimented with different combinations to maintain her skills and preserve her sensory abilities. Lucien encouraged her, saying that any bouquet she created would undoubtedly be worthy of a prize. Embarrassed, Riella thanked him and then shifted the topic. She asked if he would take some of the flowers, as she had nowhere to put the old bouquets, since she was constantly making new ones. Lucien agreed, but what he didn't expect was that Riella loaded him with a huge bundle of bouquets, so many that he could barely fit them all in the carriage. By the time he realized it was too late to refuse, he had no choice but to carry them. Lucien brought the flowers to the round table building, where the stonemancers were astonished by their sheer scale. As they unloaded the flowers, one of the deputies informed Lucien that his father was waiting in the living room. Lucien quickly went to greet him, eager not to keep his father waiting. He asked why his father had come, but instead of answering, the old man grabbed the flowers from Lucien's hands and asked where he had gotten them. Lucien was puzzled, though he knew very well he hadn't brought flowers from his father to the building. He explained that the bouquets were a gift from Riella Tanner, the AIS of Duchess Hoson. Lucien added that she was a very interesting and skilled florist. The old man remarked that it was the first time Lucien had spoken so highly of someone in front of him, to which Lucien merely shrugged. For him, Riella was such a respectable person that he didn't hesitate to compliment her. Initially, Lucien had been insincere with her, but Riella took it calmly and continued to communicate with him. In moments when Riella didn't get along with Han, Lucien for some reason felt a sense of relief, as he was able to stay calm even when dealing with the stones. He even tried to leverage their budding friendship by asking Riella for some stones, but she happily refused. She explained that she had already distributed all the stones from the inheritance and could not help him. Lucien was taken aback when Riella revealed that she had managed to match all the stones from the Duchess's will. He then examined the documents and asked why the contracts had been reduced to a year. Riella explained that the short duration would require the stones to be extended and they would need to be more carefully protected. Listening to her, Lucien realized just how difficult her task was and how well she had handled it. Riella explained that her role was simply to distribute the stones, and for any other questions, it was better to consult a specialist. She was concerned, however, that she was only seen as an unknown decision-maker, so she wanted to entrust the stone management to Lucien. Lucien immediately asked about the payment for such work, and Riella, after searching for a moment, found a document with a lease period of 10 years or more. She smiled and winked flirtatiously, saying that such an offer would definitely tempt the round table. Lucien couldn't help but laugh, as the conditions were indeed ideal for him. When Lucien later told his father about the situation, the old man jumped up and said he had something to do. Lucien was surprised, as he had expected his father to stay for dinner, but the old man didn't even pause, only adding that if Lucien didn't want to eat alone, he should get himself a girlfriend. Meanwhile, Han had been struggling with the door for an entire week, and the pressure was mounting. Every day, he had less time to open the Duchess's doors, and he grew increasingly nervous. He pressed his hand against the door for the umpteenth time, contemplating the materials it was made of, but his knowledge didn't help. The door concealed the power of over 100 different stones, and Han's biggest fear was not being able to solve the puzzle in time, especially with the 3-month deadline looming. After another failed attempt that day, Han decided to take a walk to clear his mind and gather more information. When he entered the living room of the mansion, he was taken aback. He didn't recognize the space, which was now completely decorated with flowers. Just as he was processing the scene, Han heard a woman's voice demanding that he step aside. He moved out of the way and turned around to see Riella, dressed head to toe in enormous flowers, rushing down the corridor. Behind her, Nia was carrying more floral materials and asking where to put them. The girls passed Han so quickly that he couldn't make sense of it all, although he was intrigued. Later, Han asked his assistant why there was such a commotion, and she explained that Sir Maurice, the famous royal florist, was coming to see them. Han was very surprised that the renowned florist had decided to visit Riella's mansion. Meanwhile, Nia reminded Riella that it was time to wash up and change clothes, so the girls quickly dashed away. A little later, the assistant had Riella perfectly prepared for her meeting with the famous florist. When the girl appeared, she looked stunning, and Han, who saw her, froze in amazement. Just then, Sir Maurice appeared in the doorway of the mansion, smiling gallantly as he greeted Riella, saying he was glad to meet her despite the unexpected arrival. Rita, her eyes sparkling with delight, assured the old man that his visit was a great honor for her. Sir Maurice gave the order to unload a gift he had brought, and presented Rita with a beautiful plant in a flower pot. He expressed his hope that she would like the small gift and accept it. When Rita saw the plant, she was deeply moved, as she immediately recognized it as a rose from the royal garden. She knew exactly what kind of plant it was, and that it could only be grown with personal permission. Han, too, knew of the rose, having lived part of his life in the palace and seen these plants, which were always carefully tended in the most prominent part of the royal garden. The name of the rose had been mentioned to him many times. Han was surprised by how happy Riella was to receive the flowers. Her reaction only served to convince him further of her deep affection for them. Sir Maurice, slightly embarrassed by the warmth of Riella's reaction, was pleased that his gift had made such an impact. Riella explained that such rare varieties were hard to come by, even in a lottery, which she had never succeeded in winning, let alone receiving such gifted roses. Watching the girl's delight, Han felt a pang of dissatisfaction. He couldn't understand how someone could win her over so easily. His frustration grew, so he sternly demanded that Sir Maurice explain the purpose of his visit, as he wasn't sure of the sincerity of his intentions. However, Riella immediately stepped in, defending the florist, and said that guests should not be treated so rudely. Sir Maurice agreed with her and clarified that he hadn't come for the Duchess's stones, but instead for Riella herself. Not her inheritance, or any part of it. This statement puzzled and angered Han, who gritted his teeth as he tried to make sense of what Maurice meant. The old man, innocently closing his eyes, asked if there had been a misunderstanding, as he already had a beloved wife. Sir Maurice then, with a laugh, asked if Riella would be interested in working as a royal florist with him. The proposition took Riella completely by surprise, as it was not just something she wanted, but something she had dreamed of all her life. She could hardly believe what she was hearing and sat in stunned silence for a while, trying to process the offer. Finally, she managed to squeeze out a question. Why had he chosen her? Sir Maurice explained that he had seen her recent bouquets from his friends and had recognized the work as far from amateur. At the time, he hadn't had Riella's contact information, but when he saw the bouquets she had sent to the round table, he immediately recognized her style and rushed to meet her. Han, who didn't know much about flowers, couldn't believe that someone could be recognized by their bouquet. Sir Maurice explained that only those who had worked in the field for a long time could understand this concept. Riella, understanding what the florist was saying, nodded in agreement. She explained that when you study others' work carefully, you start to recognize individual solutions that make a style unique. This was a complex, time-consuming process that required great attention to detail. The fact that Sir Maurice had identified her style through the bouquets only reinforced her belief that he was exceptional. As they drank tea, Sir Maurice reminded Riella of his proposal and that he was still awaiting her response. Riella, now fully considering the opportunity, realized that this was an incredibly good chance, one she had always wanted. Casting aside any doubts, she confidently asked Sir Maurice to take her on as a florist. Han, who had expected the lady to wisely refuse the offer, became angry at her decision. He began to grumble that leaving the duchy was too dangerous, even for the sake of the royal flowers. But Riella countered with a solid argument. She would be working in a well-guarded palace, and the danger wasn't the same there. Han had no choice but to give in, though he was still uneasy. He knew the palace was the most secure place in the kingdom, but that didn't protect her from the people inside, who could easily harm her if they wanted to. Though Han tried to offer a compromise by suggesting she travel with Nia, the Archduke quickly shot down the idea, saying that Nia would not be allowed there and that another stonemancer would likely not be approved. Sir Maurice, however, interrupted both of them, stating that Han would be the most ideal person to accompany Riella to the palace, but Han was not eager to go, preferring instead to keep her in the mansion. Meanwhile, Riella remembered that she could turn to Lucien for help, which Han had wanted to avoid until the very last moment. The Archduke then tried to subtly appeal to Nia, hoping she would also want the mistress to stay. It seemed that Nia caught the hint as she sighed sadly and attracted Riella's attention, as if about to say something. However, the assistant suddenly revealed that she would happily protect the mansion while Riella worked hard at the palace. As a result, Han, the most dissatisfied one, was simply kicked out, achieving nothing. Once the Archduke and all the servants had left, Riella became serious and asked Sir Maurice if she could learn the real reason for his visit. Sir Maurice sighed, noting that it was difficult to hide anything from her, so he would have to be honest. Riella explained that she was deeply grateful that he had chosen her, but she knew he already had a talented student, Chloe Bennet, who was widely regarded as one of the most outstanding florists in the country, second only to Sir Maurice. Concerned, Riella asked if something had happened to Chloe, which would explain why Sir Maurice was looking for another student. At the same time, in the royal palace, Chloe struggled to find her place. When she learned that her teacher had gone to Renard, she specifically requested privacy from the Queen to discuss her situation. Her Majesty granted an audience with one of her best florists. Chloe wasted no time and openly stated that she wanted to be appointed as the new chief royal florist. Unaware of these developments, Riella, with Nia's help, was preparing for her role at the palace. The assistant meticulously measured everything to ensure Riella's attire met the palace standards, from the buttons on her clothes to the colour of her shoes. After carefully inspecting her, Nia concluded that Riella met the fashion standards perfectly. However, Nia regretted that she couldn't make the mistress look even more beautiful. The girls were interrupted by Lucien, who was also dressed elegantly and had come to see Riella off. He immediately complimented her, and a brief conversation followed about sleep and food. With the palace being crowded, Lucien suggested they leave early, and Riella agreed. Before he could enter the carriage, Nia grabbed his sleeve and implored him to take care of Riella. Lucien, realizing that Nia felt left out due to the ban on her entering the palace, promised that Riella would be fine. As they drove toward the palace, Lucien remembered the notes he had received when he became the chairman of the Round Table. These notes indicated that Nia had to be carefully monitored by Han and that she was not to be allowed in the palace. If Nia became uncontrollable, it would be left entirely to the Archduke to decide her fate. Lucien couldn't help but think that it was fortunate that they were living in peaceful times. When they arrived, Riella was thrilled to see the palace up close for the first time. Lucien explained that they would be visiting the administration of the royal garden, called the Glory of the Four Seasons. Eager to explore, Riella couldn't wait to get out of the carriage, and Lucien didn't stop her. As they stepped out, a female voice greeted them. The voice belonged to Chloe Bennet, who remarked that it had been a long time since she had seen a representative in the palace. She then glanced at Riella, asking if she was indeed the one Sir Maurice had mentioned. Riella confirmed, and Chloe seemed genuinely excited to see her alive and unharmed. For Chloe, however, there was nothing extraordinary about this encounter. She wasn't at all concerned, and wanting to help Riella, she invited the new girl to reach out with any questions. Riella shook Chloe's hand gratefully, thinking that this was a different experience from her previous ideas about the famous florist. When Riella had asked about Chloe's well-being a couple of days ago, Sir Maurice had hesitated before explaining that his student had isolated him from his work and had told him to retire. The reason was that Chloe herself wanted to become the new chief florist in the palace, and she had pushed the old man aside. Now, though Chloe was kind to Riella, the girl had doubts about her true intentions. Riella couldn't help but feel that Chloe was appraising her, trying to gauge how much of a competitor she would be. She had no doubt that Chloe would soon show her true colours, just as she had done to Sir Maurice. At that moment, Chloe, in her frustration, even told her assistant that she no longer respected Sir Maurice and didn't intend to follow him as a teacher. The assistant listened in silence, knowing that Chloe simply needed to vent her emotions. Unexpectedly, another assistant joined in, expressing that she too didn't want to work for Sir Maurice. The trio soon found themselves siding with Chloe, not with the famous florist. Looking at Riella, Chloe seemed to wonder how long the mistress would last in the palace. Deciding that was enough, she turned to leave. Just then, Riella stopped her, asking if she wanted to know something. Chloe, confused, waited for an answer. But when Riella asked about her inspiration as a florist, the question caught Chloe so off guard that she didn't immediately know how to respond.